Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Ghosts and Spirits video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one yet again based on one of your newer suggestions. This one having to do with a fascinating case that has been described as one of the truest ghost stories ever told. Really old tale in fact too. In fact, when I was looking at the information associated with it, it's pretty much become a legendary status there in West Virginia. So those of you that happen to be there now, you're going to be quite familiar with this tale, and even now it seems to have taken on a fable status of sorts. But as far as the information associated with this particular ghost story, there's several ways that it goes about. I'll explain that here in a minute, and it goes by several names as well. For the purpose of this video, I'll go ahead and I'll call it the Wizard clip, but in another variation, it's known as the Livingston Wizard. And again, you'll know here in a minute as to why that is. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating information associated with this fable called the Wizard clip. So what essentially was this Wizard clip or the Livingston Wizard? Well, it was something that happened back in 1794. So again, a very long time ago, there specifically in Middleway, West Virginia. So again, those of you that are in that location, you are very familiar, no doubt, with this story, and you probably talk about this on a yearly basis, like it's probably celebrated there. And interestingly enough, there are relics, icons that you can spot around that location too, that are a hallmark to this fable. More on that here in a minute too. But on a fateful night there in 1794 in Middleway, West Virginia, there was a man that lived in a home there called Adam Livingston. There he was, just essentially there at home as is, when all of a sudden a traveling stranger, for whatever reason, decided to come to his home that night. Again, no known date associated with it, not even the name of the stranger, where he was going to or where he was coming from, but for whatever reason he picked Adam's home, and he was actually quite ill at that time. And so when that occurred, Adam saw the conditions, he brought him in, and he pretty much boarded him there at the house just to make sure that he could be taken care of. But this guy, this stranger, whoever he was, pretty much knew that he was on his last moments, like he was almost near death. And so he asked Adam if there was any way whatsoever if a Catholic priest could be brought on board, somebody that could come over and see him during his last moments. Unfortunately, Adam stated that no, the area didn't have any kind of Catholics around. It was almost devoid of it. And on top of that, he was a Lutheran, and he didn't want to have anyone nearby his home to do any kind of Catholic service. And so this stranger, whoever he was, pretty much died that night as is, died of his illness, not even known essentially what that illness was, whether it was something like a sickness or some other type of cancer, and he was buried thereafter. In fact, it was stated that he was buried, at least in one area that I was reading, in that near that land, near the home, essentially that night, and then things were left as is. But then things changed shortly afterward. In one story I was reading, it was pretty much the next morning or that same night. And in another story I was reading that it was a little while later. Mysterious things started to happen within the household. It was stated that candles, no matter where they were lit, especially in the room where this stranger ended up dying, they would not stay lit. They would always be blown out. And then mysteriously enough, there was these sounds of horses that were coming about here and there surrounding the home. Obviously, when there were no horses around, the fireplace as well seemed to have some weird activity. Anytime a fire was on, the embers would explode almost outward, almost as if the fire itself was trying to have things, let's say, burned around it, maybe even cause the actual home itself to go down. There was also things that were being broken left and right, things that were mysteriously disappearing as well. And then also there was unique circumstances, like as far as strange screams, there was money that was vanishing, livestock around the location ended up mysteriously disappearing as well, and then bells were also heard around the home. Again, all of this happened shortly after the stranger died, not having his request for a Catholic priest to do whatever it was, like in terms of his last rites of sorts. And so this thing continued on for some time period, and then it took an interesting turn. Apparently, for whatever strange reason, there were these shapes that were being cut with materials, like from materials in and around the household. So in other words, if there was fabric, if there were sheets, if there was any other type of cloth, all of a sudden they were being clipped, and they were being clipped in these like half moon shapes. You know how if you saw the moon at a certain shape, like in other words, it was being done like a classic C shape. That's essentially how these things were being cut, and they were also being cut into other type of figures as well. It was almost like someone was taking a pair of scissors and then purposely cutting them into those shapes. No one knew exactly how this was happening or when it was happening, but it definitely was, and it was occurring with so many of the other things that were there. Again, anything involving sheets, anything involving fabrics, anything like that as well. In fact, there was a visitor, someone who went by that home to showcase again how this wasn't necessarily just impacting the family, but anyone that came by that house. This visitor visited that location. She had a brand new silk cap, and it was in a handkerchief, and then that way everything else was a-okay. Like in other words, the idea was if it was wrapped around this silk, this handkerchief, then everything was going to be fine. Whatever was happening in the home couldn't touch that cap because it was buried between that handkerchief. Well, lo and behold, whenever she was leaving, she found the handkerchief completely untouched. So in other words, it was never opened. I imagine it was actually tied, like let's say in a bow tie, just to make sure that nothing could get inside. Well, there it was untouched, but the cap inside was completely cut to ribbons. And again, no one knows exactly how this happened. And so people were blaming, the family there, in other words, were blaming that it must have been this stranger. Whenever he ended up dying, he almost placed like, I don't know if it was a curse or some other type of ill intentions because of what occurred. And so they ended up calling one of the fathers there, a guy by the name of Dennis Cahill. He came over from Shepherdstown. He visited that home. He was able to spring some holy water here and there on the property. And then things changed. Like some of the manifestations actually stopped. And then even then, some of the missing money. How about this? You know, whenever this is always good stuff, some of the missing money ended up being there all of a sudden. Like it was there, found one more time. And it looks like that holy water was the cause of these things kind of stopping. But I was reading in another area that this actually continued. Like there was some manifestations that were still occurring. Some of the other screams I was mentioning earlier, that was still happening. And so as it turns out, another father came forward, another guy, this one by the name of Father Demetrius Galitzin. He heard about the legend about this wizard clip. As you can see now, that's why it was called the wizard clip, because there were clippings that were being done in the shape of a moon, like in other words, in the shape of a crescent of a moon, which is commonly associated with a wizard's hat. Like if you look at a wizard's hat or the characterization of it, you'll always see like it has that crescent moon on there. That's why this fable is called the wizard clip. Well, he was there. He heard about this particular story, and so he said a mass at the home. I don't know if he said it throughout the entire home or if he just did it in that room where that stranger ultimately died. But then the hauntings ceased altogether. That's at least one story. And another story, I was reading that it continued as is, even just tiny parts of it for years on after. But at least for the most part, it sounded like things were a-okay, like things were finally fine and that there was nothing else really happening. Whatever was associated with the stranger and his hauntings, they pretty much left after that final mass, and then that was it. The family decided that everything was pretty nice. In fact, it was done so well that afterward, Adam Livingston decided to donate 35 acres of his land to the Catholic Church. It's apparently over there by an area called Opequon Creek. And in turn, this land, part of it was turned into an area called the Priestfield Pastoral Center. So for this story, I was trying to see if I could find the exact home of Adam Livingston, wherever these infamous hauntings occurred. I couldn't find anything. Someone might have to point me out. Maybe it's truly out there on the internet, and if so, please post it in the comments exactly where that home is. I imagine that home is long gone, considering, again, this was from 1794, but the land is still there, and part of the land is there for Priestfield Pastoral Center. So if you're there in West Virginia, specifically in the Middleway area, and you wanted to essentially visit as close as can be to where this thing happened, where this entity was, and where it was doing its hauntings, closest place you can go to is this Priestfield Pastoral Center, and then that way you get to see that location, and who knows, you might have a visitor of sorts also there as well. This guy, again, whoever this was, the stranger, he may have left, but he may have come back afterward, and he may have in turn still, it may still be causing some kind of things happening there. But if anybody has any more information, anything else I might have missed, maybe those of you that happen to be there in that Pennsylvania area have more information as far as other things occurring, especially more recently, not Pennsylvania, I'm sorry, West Virginia, then please post those comments below as well. You know how much I love hearing exact tales from people that happen to be at those exact locations. Or if anybody has any more information about other versions of this story, remember I was mentioning that there was yet other types of twists and turns associated with this. In fact, there was one last one I was reading, and it was stating that this guy, Adam Livingston, he would travel around in the wagon, but as he did so, apparently there was this imaginary rope that was stretched across the roadway, I think behind him, and apparently other people that were traveling by wagon from the other side, opposite side in other words, they would see this imaginary rope and get mad because they're thinking this rope is going to get caught on my wagon and then there's going to be trouble afterward. Well, apparently this imaginary rope was caused by this stranger, again, and his hauntings, and it would cause people to try to get mad at Adam and then try to slash his wagon or slash the rope associated with it, but obviously there was nothing there, and so they didn't know what was going on. But that's another version, again, of this story too. But if anyone has anything else I might have missed on that part, any other versions altogether, then please post those comments below. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.